Okay, it's 7 o'clock. We'll go ahead and start. So good evening, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, Essentials of Effective Communication, which is part of our Get That Job webinar series here at the Champaign Public Library. My name is Jordan Neal, and I am the career librarian here at the library. So thank you all for joining us. So for the latest library news and updates, please visit our website, champaign.org, or you can follow us on social media if that's an option for you. We are open. The library is open for grab-and-go service at this time and computer use. Once again, please visit our website for more information, or you can give us a call, or you can email us at librarian@champaign.org, or you can even chat with us just by visiting the homepage of our website. We are still offering our Book a Librarian service virtually. If you need any help at home, to request a session, just visit champaign.org/bookalibrarian to fill out a request form. We are also still offering our curbside services if you prefer not to come inside the library. And then, as always, our e-library is open 24/7, where you can enjoy ebooks, movies, and more using your Champaign Public Library card, or you can sign up for a virtual library card through our website for instant access. Just moving on to a couple of Zoom features available to you that might help during this webinar. Depending on your computer device, you will see a chat and raise hand option. Clicking on the chat will open or close a chat box on the right side of your Zoom window, or sometimes it displays on the middle of your screen, and you can drag it around again depending on your computer or your device. You also have the option to raise hand to receive assistance, say if you need any technical help or you'd like to speak and ask a question or share your comment. And if you prefer not to type in the chat, I believe our presenter will have some moments here for us to engage if you want to speak or type into the chat. So we'll have some opportunities later. I would also like to remind you that webinars are recorded, so please just be mindful when you share those questions and comments. And finally, I'd like to introduce our presenter, Kevin Martlage of Nextier Advisors. I invite you, of course, to read his entire bio on our website. But Kevin is a career coach that focuses on enhancing teamwork, professional development, and performance through conversations and solutions. He actually presented a webinar on behalf of the library last month, which was titled Your Career Path. We have that recording available through the library's YouTube channel. But for now, we are happy that he's here with us again. So with that, Kevin, I will turn it over to you.
Great. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate the introduction, and thanks for attending the webinar tonight. So I'm looking forward to kind of taking you through a little presentation I've put together. We'll certainly have, as Jordan said, some time for some interaction throughout that. If you'd like to, use your chats or actually, ask a question, and certainly we'll do some follow-up afterwards. But so thanks for being here. I appreciate it. Let me share my screen here, and I will pull up what we're getting ready to go over. So we're going to talk about the essentials of effective communication for the next, say, half hour, 45 minutes, and there's going to be some interaction in terms of a couple exercises I'm going to have you do and kind of walk you through. And ideally we'd be doing this kind of in person, but certainly with COVID and everything, we certainly understand the need to do things through the webinar. And so I've kind of adjusted some of the things we typically do in person to this format. And it actually will help kind of talk about how effective communication works, both in an in-person setting as well as a virtual setting, such as this. So we'll kind of get through. We'll get started. So basically, as she said, my name is Kevin Martlage. I'm with Nextier Advisors, and we really focus on enhancing performance, teamwork, and careers through intentional conversations and solutions. And so the reason that's important to kind of understand before we get started is the basis of my work is really helping individuals have their own personal awareness about different things. What are they interested in? What are their communication styles? How do they take in information? How do they make decisions on that information? And how does that kind of approach to things impact not only their own personal lives, but maybe the team that they're working on, or how does it help them achieve that career or that next job that they're looking for? And so my work is really focused on kind of internal reflection in how can I help you understand your impact on whatever it is that you might be doing. And if you can fully understand that, it really helps to enhance communication or enhance your performance or enhance the ability to build those teams and to continue to move things in a positive direction towards a goal, whether that's an individual goal or an organizational goal. And so having awareness of your personal communication style is helpful in identifying both leadership enhancements that can lead to more intentional and productive engagement with others. And so that's what we're going to kind of be talking about today, is how do you kind of adjust, or what are some things you can do to look at your own internal communication style to help you, have effective communication, both listening and speaking. So we're going to be spending a little bit of time of talking about how we can increase that awareness of your individual communication behaviors, and your effect on both productivity will allow the individual to create new patterns of communication that are consistent with their intentions. You're going to hear me talk a lot tonight about, what is the intent of the conversation you're trying to have, or what is the intent of the conversation that the person is having with you, and how do you really understand that to make it a very intentional conversation and really get to the context of what it is. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that here in just a few minutes. So if we can do that, it'll in turn offer others an opportunity to perceive the individual intentions more productively, thus improving overall communication and understanding. So the goal here is, if we can understand how we're receiving that information and how we can listen to understand instead of listening to respond, it will help improve our ability to have that effective communication with that person. And there's all kinds of things you can read about, but communication is one of the most misunderstood and undervalued of all the interpersonal skills that you might have. And despite this, most people feel that they are really good at communicating effectively. And in most cases, they are, but we're trying to help you enhance that ability to effectively communicate and maybe take that to the next level. So that'll be the gist of what we're going to be talking about today. And so the goals for today's webinar is I'm going to talk a little bit about the difference between reactive and intentional communication. We're going to talk a little bit about the importance of active listening, which might be a term that some of you may have heard already. We're going to talk about that a little bit. And then we're also going to talk about how to become more intentional and effective with your communication. So what are some tips and some tools and some things that you can do to become more intentional and effective in your communication? And so I'm gonna provide you some things to kind of think about and things that you can kind of practice on your own and so forth. So Stephen Covey, I don't know if you guys know him or not, but Stephen Covey has a saying that I just really like, that the biggest problem with communication is we do not listen to understand, we listen to reply. So how many times have you guys been in a conversation with somebody, whether it be a friend or a spouse, a significant other, or maybe a coworker, where you're having that conversation with them and you already have in your head how you're going to respond to that? And how many times have you maybe, after you've responded, didn't catch the gist of everything that they were saying? And so that's what we talk about, where you're listening to understand instead of listening or you're listening to reply rather than listening to understand. And so we're going to go through a few exercises here to kind of really help you understand and get to the passion that they're talking about and the context they're talking about using active listening and so forth. So I hope everybody got the email from Jordan today. I'm sorry it was kind of day of, but hopefully you all have two pieces of paper in front of you that you have access to. And these can just be regular size sheets of paper. It doesn't matter what color, it doesn't matter if there's something written on it or not. You are going to be ripping the paper up a little bit. We're going to go through a little exercise. And I'm going to give you some instructions on what we're going to do with the paper. But if you don't have a couple pieces of paper, please go grab some really quick, and then we'll kind of get started. So I can't see everybody, so I'm going to assume that we're good to go. So if there's any chats or anything out there, let me know, Jordan. So, all right, so the first thing I want to have you do is have that piece of paper and hold it in front of you. And I'd like you to fold the bottom half of the paper up and just fold that piece of paper in half. Okay. This is just on one of the pieces of paper. We're going to be doing this twice. So you're just folding that piece of paper, you're taking the bottom and folding it up in half. Okay, this is where it's going to get tricky. So now take that piece of paper, and from the top right corner of the paper, I want you to measure in what I'm going to call 2 knuckles. So you can see my finger. you're going to use this part of your finger right here as your knuckle and your measuring stick. And you're going to do 2 knuckles in from the right-hand side of the paper. And you're going to fold that down to halfway down the right side of the paper. And you're going to tear off that top right triangle of paper that you just made. So you're measuring over 2 knuckles from the top right corner across the top. You're measuring halfway down the right side, and you're tearing that triangle of paper off. Give everybody a couple minutes to get that done. You didn't all know that that's a good measuring stick right there that you can use on your finger. All right, so now once you're done with that, I'd like you to take that piece of paper that you have now, and I want you to fold the top half of the paper down over the bottom half. You're folding that piece of paper in half again from the top down. So fold that down. Right. And then your last step in this little exercise is I'm going to have you from the top right corner again. I'm going to have you measure in along the top a distance of 1.5 knuckles this time. So again, using your finger. And then again, down the right side halfway. And you're going to tear that little piece of triangle piece of paper off as well. You're measuring over 1.5 knuckles and down the right side halfway, and you're going to tear off that triangle as well. Okay. So if we were all in person, we would then share, and I know you guys can't share now, but how many of you have a piece of paper that looks like this? I don't know if you can see it very well with my computer, but it should have at the top, it's flat, right? Up and down, and you got these 2 jagged areas over here. So how many people, you can respond through the chat, does your piece of paper look like this? You can see the whole thing. Any thoughts? Any responses on there?
I think I could briefly, if someone is willing to turn their video on, I can do that briefly if you'd like to share through video. That's an option too.
Whoop. If there's a picture of what it could look like, what it should look like. Looks like we had a couple chats in there. Nope, that's not what it looks like. All right, let's see where the chat is here. All right, so let's talk about that a little bit. And I'm having trouble, Jordan, having the chat feature up. Oh, there we go. Okay. So I had one person say, no, that wasn't it. So let's talk about that a little bit. You can respond through the chat as well if you'd like. But let's do this whole process again. But this time, I'm going to give you a little bit more intentional instructions in terms of the communication. And we're going to start with, so grab that second piece of paper. We're going to start with, I'm going to show you what the finished product should look like to begin with. So you can see on your screen right now, that's what it should look like when we're done. So as I go through these steps, it should look like this when you're finished. So hopefully that's pretty clear and intentional in terms of what the finished product is going to look like. So we'll go through the exact same steps that I did before. I just read these, I just didn't show them to you. So you're going to take that piece of paper and you're going to fold the bottom half up to the top half. So again, showing you the pictures on the screen, and I'm reading the same instructions that I did before. Okay. And then we're going to, from the top right corner of the paper, we're going to measure in 2 knuckles, distance from the top right corner across the top, and measure halfway down the right side. And you're going to tear this top right triangle of the paper off. Again, you can see the pictures here. So I think somebody chatted, but I didn't. It's not showing up on my computer.
They said you did not say to hold paper horizontal.
I didn't. That's right. I didn't. I just said to. You can see the picture here, but that first time I was just simply reading the instructions. Right. Okay. Now we're going to fold the top half of that paper down again over the bottom half. That was the third step in our little process. Good. And then the final step is we're going to measure 1.5 knuckles in again, and then halfway down, measure the top right corner again, measuring along the top of the distance, 1.5 knuckles, and down the right side halfway, and you're going to tear off this triangle as well. So you should have, when it's all done, the finished product. And let's get some ideas when you're done this time. What does everybody's piece of paper look like this time when you had a little bit more specific instructions in terms of you could see it visually, and had some more intentional kind of communication with getting those things done? Any thoughts? Did everybody's turn out better the second time? Okay.
Mine definitely did. I'll say that.
Yours did? Okay. Yeah, there you go. Looks great. Looks great. So, all right. I don't know if there's any other chats or anything that are coming in, but let me know.
Not right now.
Not yet. Okay. So again, how did you do the second time, and how did the pictures create the context for the verbal direction? So, one of the comments was you didn't tell us to turn it horizontally. You're absolutely right. That's kind of by design with this. That's why we do it twice. So the pictures are providing you context to help illustrate some of the instructions that I was telling you and just verbalizing to you. And so what we try to think at when you look at communicate more effectively, you obviously don't always have the opportunity to have a picture to go along with whatever it is you might be describing to somebody. So for instance, picture yourself in an interview for a job, or you're talking with a team member, or you're sending an email to somebody. How are you communicating to them so they can visualize your entire picture of what you're trying to get across and the context around that and what your intent is for that? And so those are just some questions I'd ask as you're going through. We do that exercise in 2 steps like that. And so, how did your past impact your progress and confidence? So your artistic, your good eye-hand coordination, your imagination. So when you did that second time, what did you think about that first time that you maybe did differently? You're probably paying a little bit closer attention to more of the details with the picture and trying to, make sure it was, just like what you saw on the screen. And how did seeing the finished product help you understand the directions, right? So again, perfect comment. You didn't tell us to turn it horizontally. You're right. The picture showed you to turn it horizontally, but how could I have communicated that to you more? If I would have just said, turn it horizontally, you could have done it either way. If you would have started this way, you're turning it horizontally, it could be the other way, and up and down and so forth. So really being very clear and trying to understand and communicate exactly what I was trying to get across, the pictures help that. And then what are some of the implications around sending emails and kind of verbal expectations? Obviously we're talking through Zoom here. And so there's a little bit of different dynamic in terms of, if we were in person kind of talking through these things. But how can you, in sending emails or doing, some of those verbal expectations and so forth with communication, how can you do those differently to be a little bit more intentful, to make sure that, the person receiving that information is understanding what you're saying, and at the same time, you're actively listening to let them know that, hey, I understand where you're coming from, and I do understand what we're talking about. So that's just a little kind of fun to do, just to kind of illustrate, how important it is to really give somebody the context around what you're talking about. And we're going to start talking about reactive and intentional communication for the rest of the call here, to kind of give you some more insight into what that can kind of look like. So one thing when you talk about communication, there's a basic human need that's out there, and hopefully we can all kind of agree with this, but there's a basic human need to be heard and to be given a voice, right? And so I have a basic need as a human. I like to be heard. So, I want to have a platform or a voice, whatever it might be, whether it's I'm just trying to get a point across to somebody, or I'm trying to communicate to somebody. I want to be given that opportunity to kind of tell them, what I'm trying to get across to them. And then I like to be heard as well. I want to have some kind of feedback from that communication or that voice saying that, hey, I understand what you're talking about. I may not always agree, but I understand what you're talking about. And so I want to ask you some more questions to fully understand that. And so when we talk about reactive communication, that's kind of me-centered. We're going to talk about that a little bit. So when I'm having a conversation, it's all about, hey, I did this, or my thought is this. I think we should do that. We need to go and do this. So reactive is very me-centered, and it's not really doing a good job of really understanding that other person. So if I'm having a conversation with somebody, it's more about me and perception and what I'm trying to get across to you, where intentional communication is more about the you. So I'm still having a conversation with you, but I'm doing it in such a way where I'm asking questions of you. And instead of, talking about, hey, this is my perception and this is my thought and this is what we need to do, I may say, let me hear your thoughts on this, or, can I have permission to talk freely? Let me give you some thoughts on this kind of stuff. And so it's really trying to get into the mindset of being empathetic with the person you're talking to, with your audience, understanding their point of view, and also trying to pull them in terms of, so they really understand that you have their best interest in mind as well, and you're helping them to provide that context. And so we do that through what we call active listening, and we'll get to that here in just a few minutes. So when you talk about reactive communication, this is where we talk about we're speaking from and listening for kind of self-judgment. And so a lot of times this is where arguments can kind of arise, where it's all about me, and I'm not trying to, in a workplace or in a team setting, trying to understand your perspective and trying to resolve some of these things. It might come across as being, I'm interrupting people, because as I'm listening to you talking to me, I'm listening to respond instead of listening to understand. It's very persistent. You're insisting on, hey, this is what, the way we need to do it. It can come across as being manipulative sometimes, or that you're ignoring somebody, or you're discounting that person's kind of point of view. And some of those are real extreme, circumstances, but those are some things when you talk about reactive communication that could kind of come up. And so the goal of that kind of communication is the person that's speaking and listening is trying to look good and trying to kind of win, we're calling it. And so when you talk about reactive listening, it's where you're ensuring they give you what you already know. So you've gone into that conversation, and you already have maybe some preconceived notions, or you already have in your mind, this is the best way we should approach this problem, or this is the best way we should do this project. And so you're leaving some stuff on the table, perhaps, because you're not having that enhanced communication with them and getting those other perspectives. You're hoping that they finally get your point. So no matter what you're saying, it's like, you're never going to change my mind. I'm telling you this because you need to understand my point of view on this. And you're listening for what makes you right, and you're listening through your filters, which we'll talk about here in just a few minutes. And so some of these things, when you first hear them, are very kind of out there, and you're like, wow, those sound kind of harsh. But if you think about it in maybe a context of your own conversation you've had with somebody, have there been opportunities that you've had those conversations where, as you're talking with somebody or you're listening to somebody or whatever, you already have in your mind, you're like, I already know how I'm going to respond to this. So get through what you're talking about and let's get on to my point of view, right? And so we want to be always aware of how we maybe come across when we're listening specifically. Reactive speaking on the same side is ensuring that you give them what you already know. And so you're telling them, your perception. They will get your point eventually, and they're speaking from what you have decided is right, and you're speaking from your filters instead of their filters. So, that's both reactive listening and reactive speaking. So that's one side of it. And so some other things that we talk about, you hear about the little voice in your head, your internal broadcast, lack of responsibility, maybe unaware perceptions on the listening side. And speaking, it's all about me. So my ego starts to come out a little bit. External broadcast, not responsible, and you're creating perceptions in others. So you're really trying to understand and empathize with that person, but you're not coming across that way. And so it's affecting negatively some of that communication that you have. And so this is where I want to kind of open it up. And can anybody give me an example of maybe something they've been involved with where they felt like it was reactive speaking? So you were there listening, and maybe the person was being very reactive in what they were talking to you about. Any thoughts out there or examples anybody would like to share? Any chats or anything? Oh, how about, is it maybe easier to talk about examples of reactive listening? So sometimes where maybe you were, as you were listening to somebody talking, you were being very reactive, or as you were talking to somebody, you felt like they were being very reactive in terms of their listening.
And I don't know if you can see the chat. Someone says, I don't have an example. I feel I always reactive speak though.
You always react to speak? Sure, absolutely. So I don't know if you want to elaborate on that a little bit more, but you're very reactive, and so you're kind of coming up with what you want to say before the person's maybe done talking. Is that kind of what I'm hearing?
Yeah, they said always.
Sorry. Oh, there's the chat.
There, you see
always.
it?
Okay. Yeah, there's the chat. I'm sorry. My computer's having problems with the chat for whatever reason. It's always reactive. Always. Okay, good. Any other examples out there of reactive speaking or reactive listening? So I'd like for you to really think about, as we're going ahead, maybe thinking about how you reactive speaking and reactive listening can impact maybe a job interview you're going on. Or if you already have that job, the team that maybe you work with, or even, even in your personal life, if you have a relationship with somebody, and how reactive speaking and listening can kind of come into play. We'll be talking about that a little bit later. So let's talk about active listening. So active listening, if you remember back to that first chart, that's how you kind of go from the reactive to intentional communication. And so active listening is a pretty common thing. So that's where you have body language is involved. So leaning forward into the conversation, giving those head nods about, yes, I understand that, or no, I don't understand that, where you're asking clarifying questions, you're providing that important eye contact. And, typically if we were in person, I do an exercise where you have two people, pair up, and we have one person just start talking about a story that they have to the other person, and we have that other person just totally ignoring them, right? And then we do the same thing where we have them, practice some active listening through that. And you'd be surprised at just how important that is, that body language and that active listening is to not only the person, telling the story, because they know that you're involved and engaged with that, but also the person listening, because there's no way if you're intentionally ignoring somebody, you're going to understand what they're talking about. And so it's really trying to understand and get to the context of what they're doing. And then you start to look at, things like we've all been dealing with for the past year with the pandemic, and how Zoom and virtual, interactions have become more and more prevalent. Jordan and I were talking, I think I was on 6 Zoom calls today. And so how do you do active listening when it's all virtual like this, right? I'm sitting here, I can't see you guys, you can see me. The only way I'm interacting with you is through chatting, or, since I couldn't see it, Jordan would have to come in and interpret for me what it is that you're talking about. And so that active listening is very difficult. And it's things that as we go on and we keep going through the pandemic and doing more and more virtual things like this, we're all getting better at it, but it's very difficult at times. And so some things that you can do through active listening is, making sure your video's on, using the chat feature, asking clarifying questions, being visibly present in that virtual setting. And that's even more important if any of you have had those virtual, job interviews. I deal with a lot of clients that are going through virtual job interviews, which, how do you really get across intentionally what you're trying to talk about through a virtual setting? And so really being aware of what that looks like and that content. And then we'll start talking about intentional communication. So intentional communication on the other side is speaking from and listening for intention. And so this is where, as somebody that you're listening to, you're paraphrasing, you're asking some clarifying questions, you're giving that person the benefit of the doubt, your interest in them more than you. And so when somebody comes up to you, it's like, hey, it's so great to see you. How are the kids doing? And really asking, well, that's so great to hear. Tell them I said hi, and doing all those kind of things, being very genuine in the way that you're coming back and you're listening and speaking for that. And so we call that, speaking from intention. And so on the intentional listening side, you're ensuring that you receive the message from them as they intend, and you're listening for what they're trying to talk about. And so you're very actively trying to pull that out. And we're going to talk about that here in just a second. Where speaking, you're ensuring that others receive your message as intended, and you're speaking from your intention as opposed to their intention. And so, why that is important, if you look back to the first thing, I'm sorry, there's some more chats there. How would you modify the body language for Zoom? We'll be Zoom interviewing. I find the Zoom backgrounds distracting. I'm looking at that rather than the speaker. Absolutely. I think those are things that are very important. We'll talk about here in just a few minutes. The other question was, and I wonder why voice is muffed or clear. Is the internet or what? I'm distracted, and that takes away from the interaction. Absolutely. And I think there's a piece of what people are doing now, and knowing with Zoom, people are aware there's bad internet connections. People are aware that, a lot of people are working from home. It may not be your classic office, setting. And so there's some level of understanding there, but certainly you want to put forth your best effort in a job interview, and being very aware of, getting on the call early, or pulling up Zoom on your computer, making sure your camera looks great, you got a good background, you're sitting up straight, all those kind of things that just like you would do in a normal interview, but certainly it's a lot different, talking into a computer as well. So I just encourage, in terms of those, comments, kind of getting on there early and checking out what you look like through the video, and checking your speaker and your voice and so forth ahead of time. So talking about intentional communication and speaking, so that's where you're really coming from your intention. You're really trying to understand the context of what they're saying. And so what we say in intentional communication is, awareness grants you choice, and that choice allows you to be effective in the moment. And so if you can become aware of what it is they're specifically trying to talk to you about, or you can be very clear in how you're communicating something. So go back to that paper exercise at the beginning, where, if I were to start out from the beginning, here's what good looks like, here's what the end product looks like. I'm going to show you some videos or some pictures throughout the process. I'm going to be very clear in my instructions, kind of like I did on the second time through. How much time could that save you in an interaction in a team setting? Or how much more effective could you be in a job interview if you're very intentful as to what you're saying? And we're going to get into that in just a few minutes. So when you talk about intentional communication, you're probably thinking to yourself, well, how do I go about doing this? And so the easiest thing to do is to listen for the emotion and the passion, to ensure then that you understand the context. And so if you're listening for that, it's going to be able to help you create what then you can communicate back to them. And so the words are easy. We all hear the words, right? It's, we all have, we can all hear me talking. I can hear you talking if you were, or Jordan talking. And so the words are there. So now it's all about the content. I need to really be able to, and this takes some practice, I really need to be able to, when I hear somebody talking, get to the content that they're really doing. And a lot of that you can do through emotion and the feelings. You can tell when somebody is really engaged and really excited about what it is they're talking about. And you have to be able to pick up on that, so then you can, use that to ask clarifying questions, or to come back and talk with them some more. And so how I listen allows me to speak more about what is important to you. And that's going to help enhance that communication between me and you, right? Because I'm going to be really in tune with what is important to you. You've come to me to have a conversation with me, so I need to understand that emotion, that feeling, so I can then, return that in the way I'm responding back to you. And if you can get through the words and understand the content through understanding their emotions and feelings, that's really going to give you the intent or the context of what that person is talking about. And that's what we're trying to get at when you think about intentional communication, is what is the context around what they're doing, and how can I communicate that back out to them. So intentional listening and speaking, we're listening for intention. You're responsible for others getting it. Listen on 3 levels: words and content, emotion and intention. And so a key thing on this and listening is that I want you to understand is you're responsible for ensuring others get it. So that first time we went through that paper exercise, I was not responsible for you getting it. I was, giving you some steps. However you interpret it is however you interpret it. That second time, I took more of an intentful approach to it, where I said, okay, I'm going to be responsible for you being successful in this project. So I'm going to show it to you ahead of time. I'm going to show you pictures throughout. We're going to be very specific on some of the discussions or the instructions and so forth. And then the last part, speaking, you're speaking from your intention. You'd be responsible for the other person getting it. You're providing a frame, which we'll talk about in a second, in the context and content. So as you're speaking, you're being very clear on what it is you're talking about. You're talking about, the end goal. Hey, I'm coming to you today because I'd like to talk to you about X, Y, and Z. And if it's appropriate, I like to kind of just, go through and speak a little frank with you about those things. So you're setting that frame and you're setting that baseline up front so they know why you're coming to them to have that conversation and so forth. And so we'll kind of open it back up. Anyway, give me an example of when they were on the receiving end of intentional communication. So tell me about maybe a conversation you had with somebody that you just thought was awesome. They were engaged, you were engaged, you were really talking, on the same level, you understood each other. Any examples out there anybody'd like to share? Even if it wasn't perfect, what's one that maybe stands out as more effective than another? Why was that effective? Comments? Thoughts? No? Okay. So one example I could share with you is, I've managed a lot of people in my career, and I had one employee that we didn't hit it off at first. We kind of didn't see eye to eye on things, but I learned very quickly about how I would approach those conversations with that person. And so there was a lot of, kind of friction between me and that person for whatever reason. We didn't know each other. We just started working each other. I think it was more that we just didn't understand each other. We didn't get to know each other very well. And so when I started to have conversations where I started out by saying, here's why I'm coming to you today, this is what I like to talk about, our conversations started to be more fluid and more effective, because when I walked into their office, they were not questioning why I was there. I was telling them right ahead. I was making sure that they were going to be successful in this conversation. And I would say, hey, I got an issue I need to talk with you about. I need your help in resolving this. Can you help me with that? And here's some thoughts I had. I'd love to hear your thoughts. How do you think we should resolve these things? And so I was really, approaching that conversation as, I wanted them to be successful. I didn't want them, all those preconceived notions, whatever they were, good, bad, or indifferent, I was going to set those aside. I'm here to talk to you about this. I'm setting my attention up front, and we're going through and we're starting to have that conversation. As we started to do that, we got on the same page and we understood each other, and that person would do the same thing with me, because we set those ground rules at the beginning, in the very early stages, about, hey, when I come in, this is how I'm going to approach things. This is how we're going to structure that. Does that sound okay with you? Is there any way I can change that approach and so forth? So it's really just being upfront and honest with people and speaking about that intention and making sure that you're doing everything you can to make them successful as well. So we talked a little bit about intentional listening affected in a virtual setting. So we can open that up again too. We talked a little bit with the, some of the chats that were out there about, poor Wi-Fi, or your voice is muffled and all that kind of stuff. So you have to be even clearer when you're having those conversations and so forth. And what are some of the things you can do to ensure intentional listening in a virtual setting? We kind of talked about a little bit. And then how can you use intentional listening and speaking during a job interview? And so this is where I was going to spend a little bit of time kind of talking about that. And what are some of the pitfalls of not using intentional listening and speaking during a job interview? So I'll kind of open it up to see if anybody has any, thoughts on how can being very intentful in how you're listening and speaking, how can that help impact a job interview, in your opinion? Like speaking with intent and making sure that you're very clear and you're helping the interviewer be successful in understanding what you're trying to get across. Any thoughts? Okay. So let's give you an example here. So somebody is, you're in a job interview, they're asking you a question, and you're trying to, obviously it's very difficult in that job interview setting because those questions are coming at you and you're having to think on your feet, how can I answer this, the best way possible to get my intent across and my helping them be successful in understanding what I'm trying to talk about. Right? There's a comment, interviewer might understand that you're a team player. Sure. So, if you are that team player, which I'm sure everybody is, if you're trying to get that job, how are you going to create that context to let them know that they're a team player? You're not going to say, hey, I'm a team player, but maybe you can approach it by, being very intentful and say, I have a great example of where I was a team player. And I'd like to share that with you. And here are the steps I went through. This is why I thought I was successful as a team player. And these were the results, why I knew I was a team player. And so I wanted to kind of share that with you. Another example on the chat, it serves an example for how you might interact with guests or customers, and also how you might write emails. Absolutely, right? So we talked a little about emails earlier and how you interact with like guests or customers that you might be dealing with, writing that email and putting the intent right up there at the beginning. You look at the reference field or the memo field when you write an email, or what the subject is, put that in your email. Hey, I'm writing you this email today to talk about XYZ, and then going through those steps. So they know right at the beginning, this is your intent, this is where you're coming from. Or if you have something that you're trying to talk with them negatively about, or there's an issue you're trying to overcome, you're coming at it with, hey, my intent here is not to, upset you, but there's really something that we need to discuss. And I hope that we can have that open conversation, as opposed to going in there and say, hey, I need to, figure this out with you. You're taking that emotion out of it. Another comment, I think it's also a skill that might be harder to teach someone. So it's particularly valuable if an employer doesn't have to train you on that as well. Absolutely, you're 100% correct. And so that is where interpersonal, communication and skills such as this are very important. So, I've hired a lot of people over my career through different jobs that I had, and I always said, hey, I can teach you how to do that job. Right? You're going to have a background that's favorable to us. And you're obviously here because your resume and your history and your career and everything that's done that. But I can teach you the specifics about this job. But it's the attitude and it's your approach and it's how you interact and that communication piece that's kind of that X factor that helps set people apart. And so I totally agree with you in terms of it's tough to teach something like this, a subject like this, but it's all about that awareness. And if you can start being aware of how you're communicating, receiving, and sending out communication, you're only going to continue to improve upon that. So again, you're going to make that great first impression with that employer as you're coming in and being very intentful with that communication. So absolutely. So what are some of the pitfalls of not using intentional listening and speaking during a job interview? What happens if you just go in there and kind of, tell them like it is? You're not being very intentful or trying to help them be successful and understanding what you have to say. Any thoughts on that? No. Big thing is they're not gonna get the full story, right? They're not gonna understand maybe all of the great things that you have brought to the table and you will be bringing to the table for that employer, right? And so how do you go about, telling them those things and being very specific and intentful about the things that you're good at, your skills, and what you're bringing to the table? That'd be the biggest pitfall. They don't leave that under that conversation, fully understanding each other in terms of what your skills are. And on the other side, you may not leave that conversation fully understanding all the things that they may be offering, or have a good interaction and feeling about that person who's probably going to be the person you're going to be reporting to in that job. So it goes two ways. It's very important to understand them, and it's a great way for them to kind of see the full picture of what you're about if you're speaking with that intent. All right, let's go on to the last part, and we'll kind of talk about some tips and tools that I think might be helpful to this. And so, we talk about framing the context or listening. And so when we talk about listening frames, our goal here is to have kind of mutual accountability and alignment. And so when I'm listening to you, I want to effectively align my understanding with what you're trying to say. And so I'm doing that through the things like we talked about, asking those follow-up questions, really trying to get to the passion and what they're trying to get to and the context of that conversation. And so in order to do that, you have to be very aware of, what is the nature of the conversation you're in? Is that person coming to you just to vent? Are they coming to you to have you help them fix something? Are they coming to you for advisement? Are they coming to you just for you to empathize with what they're trying to talk about? And so when we talk about listening frames, to help try to get to that context of what somebody's coming about, you really want to understand the nature of why they're coming to you. And if they're great at intentional communication and intentional speaking, that's going to be very easy, because they're going to come to you and say, I just need to vent. I'm not expecting an answer, but can you just listen to me for a little bit? So you're approaching that conversation a lot differently than they've just come in and they start, going off on all the bad things that are going on in the office or whatever, right? You don't know if, hey, do you want me to fix that? You want me to give you advice? Are you just here to vent? Whatever. So really trying to get yourself in the habit of understanding that situation and understanding the context or maybe what they're trying to do. In a perfect world, they're going to come to you and they're going to tell you that, hey, here's why I'm coming to you today, to have these conversations. And then the other thing, which we're going to talk about here in just a second, is called a STAR conversation. Some of you may know what that is, but as you're trying to not only listen, but also then respond, you're trying to understand the situation, the task that you maybe need to communicate, the action that you did, and what that result might be. So we're going to talk about that here in just a few slides. As to what that STAR looks like. But it's really important to kind of understand the framing of what it is that you're trying to listen to. So some helpful tips about intentional listening. Check your perceptions before listening. So again, what's my perception of this situation? Is it true? Is it false? How do I understand, what it is the conversation is I'm at to have? You're focusing on their intention and feelings, not your perceptions. So no matter what my preconceived notion is for this conversation or about that person or that job interview I'm going into, I might be, nervous. I might feel like I haven't prepared properly, whatever. You're focusing on their intention and their feelings of what they're trying to understand from you, as opposed to all those other perceptions that are out there. You're listening for their intentions through emotions. You're checking your ego and the need to be right or look good. You're suspending judgment, and you're asking those clarifying questions, but don't make it about you. And you help them create more content by pursuing their context through your listening. And so you're asking those questions, you're trying to understand their content, and by pursuing that context and getting to the middle of that square diagram that we looked at. So those are all things that you can do just on a daily basis. Try it with a friend that you have. Try it with a significant other. Try it with, a coworker if you have one. Or be thinking about these things as you're going into that job interview, because it's going to help you fully understand what it is they're trying to get and trying to hear back from you. Framing the context for speaking. So what is the context for the content? What your intention is, what your intention is not. Sometimes you have to request permission. Is it the appropriate person? Is it the appropriate timing? Is it the appropriate location? So all of these things are some things you can think about as you're going into that conversation. You're sending that email. You're having that virtual conversation with somebody on Zoom. You're looking at, how can I help you be successful in understanding the context of this interaction that we're having? How can I tell you right up front what my intent is for being here? How can I tell you what my intent is not for being here? I'm not here to try to solve this today. I'm just here to have you listen and to bounce some ideas off of you. So you're telling them that up front, because that's going to help them understand your context, why you're coming there. Sometimes if it's a tough conversation, you got to have permission. Hey, is this a good time for us to have a conversation about, that report that got messed up last week? Or is this a good time for us to have a conversation about, that attendance problem or whatever it might be? Sometimes you have to have request that permission from that person, because that's going to help set the tone right at the beginning. And you have to have that trust with that person where they may say, you know what, it's not the best time, but here is a good time that we can have. Can we schedule it then? And so that's where some of this enhanced communication really starts to take off. And then obviously understanding if it's the appropriate person, the time to have that communication in the proper location. So a STAR story is another tool I wanted to kind of give you. There's a colleague of mine, and the STAR story has been around forever. You can read about it on the internet. I like the interpretation of a colleague of mine over in Indianapolis called Wayfinders Consulting about what a STAR story is. And a STAR story is your situation, the task, the action, and the result. And so this is a very good way of approaching maybe a job interview to help you speak with intent, to help you make sure you're getting your thoughts across properly, a way you can approach maybe a question that they're asking you. And so you start with the situation. So you're describing the overall situation you're involved with. So maybe there was a disgruntled customer, there was a looming deadline, inefficiency in the way the business is being run, whatever it might be. You're starting with the situation and you're clearly talking about that situation. Hey, there was a bad customer experience I had to deal with. And then you're talking about the task. What was the role, the goal in resolving or optimizing the situation? And so did you have to create a plan? Did you need to get the team organized? What were the specific tasks that you had to go through to resolve that situation or to address that situation? And then the action. What are the actions you took to resolve or optimize the situation? So maybe you offered the customer a refund, perhaps you provided an additional service free of charge, worked overtime, led a weekly task force meeting to address the issue, whatever those things were. So, you're starting with a situation, the tasks that you went through and the actions you took to resolve that. And then you certainly want to end with the results. So what was the outcome of your actions? And hint, in an interview, it should always be positive. But be as specific as possible regarding that outcome. So if there's metrics or data that you can provide, the more concrete and intentional you can be with your results, the more impactful and convincing your story. And so the reason I think this is a good tool I wanted to kind of introduce you to, and like I said, you can read about it online almost everywhere, is as you're speaking to somebody, this is a great way to kind of collect your thoughts and to approach that conversation. It's going to help you be very intentful. It's going to help you be very specific. It's going to help them understand, specifically what you're talking about. But you can also reverse this and try to understand when you're having that conversation and listening to somebody, okay, what's the situation they're talking about? What's the context that they have? What are some of the tasks that they're talking about? Because that's obviously the passion or the emotion that's involved, because that's the real work that they put into that situation. And so those are some things I can key upon and say, hey, that sounds like a really tough situation you're in. And that first step you went through, tell me a little bit more about that. And so you're pulling them in, you're empathizing with that person, understanding that. Then obviously the actions. So there's some key things you can pick up on there in terms of passion and emotion involving that conversation. And certainly the results. And so if you start to think about conversations you're having with people and you're trying to pick up on 1, 2, 3, or 4 of these things in their conversation, it could really help you actively listen to what they're talking about, help you actively understand what the context is of their conversation, and really help enhance that communication between yourself and that individual, which is the ultimate goal in all of this. So just a little tool out there, and I encourage you to go do some more research if you'd like on that subject. So that's basically the content. It ran a little bit longer than I was expecting, but I hope you found it helpful. And after this, I'd be more than happy to have like a 30-minute follow-up call with anybody if you have any questions. Jordan can send that information out. I have a link there to my calendar. You can just pick a time that works for you. If you'd like to follow up or ask any other questions, or there's something that maybe just didn't make sense, or you'd like to kind of dive into more, I'd be more than happy to have that conversation with you and get to meet you and see if there's anything I can do to continue to help you enhance that communication and provide that effective communication both on the listening and the speaking side of things. So with that, I will open it up for questions if there are any. And we can kind of go from there. So.
Thank you, Kevin. If you have any
No problem.
questions, you don't have to type it into the chat. If you click that raise hand feature, I could also unmute you so you could speak. All right, while we await those, I'll start sharing. So if you have any further questions, you can reach out to me directly. Let's see, keep up with my chat here. Let's see here. So our next webinar will be next week. Well, first off, thank you, Kevin.
Yeah,
that
no
was
problem.
great,
Thank you.
as usual.
Thank
I've always taken great notes whenever you're around, so I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.
But yeah, our next webinar is Tuesday, March 9th. I can't believe we're already in March, but that will be conflict resolution with Joshua Ford. He is an instructor at Indiana University, and he'll discuss how to address conflict, of course, including communication and mediation strategies, as well as, analyzing some root sources that will hopefully just maybe lead to some desirable outcomes for everyone, of course. We hope, of course, you'll consider more of our career webinars. I've listed the ones for March coming up, but we have a lot more webinars coming up related to our business series, our technology series, our writers workshops, our crafty adults. So if you could just visit champaign.org/events for more information. You could sign up and get Zoom links for those. Let's see, I always forget to turn my video on here at the end. So once again, please visit our website for the latest library news and updates. You can follow us on social media, of course, or you can email us, or you can chat with us. We are still offering those Book a Librarian sessions, mostly through Zoom, but we could totally meet via platform of your choice. I know we've done Skype and things like that. And, we're still reviewing resumes and cover letters. We've been hosting a lot of practice interviews. So please let us know. We'll definitely can get you connected with Kevin as well. I'll be sure to send an email out with his calendar. And I still don't see any further questions here.
No.
Oops. Yeah, Kevin, I feel you with the Zoom technology tonight. It's just everything's just a little delayed with them. I guess that's how we adapt, right? All right. Well, thank you, everyone, for joining us. Thank you once again to Kevin. I will go ahead and end the webinar, and I wish everyone a good night. Take care.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Take care.